For most of human history, we weren't at the top of the food chain. That's not a metaphor, and it's not a humbling philosophical observation. It's a biological fact, backed by fossil evidence, bite marks on ancient bones, and the deeply ingrained fear responses that still live in your nervous system today. Long before we built cities, before we discovered fire, before we developed language sophisticated enough to warn each other about what was out there, our ancestors spent millions of years being hunted, tracked, caught, eaten. The predators that did this weren't some vague background threat. They were specific, terrifying, and extraordinarily effective at killing us. And understanding who they were changes something fundamental about how you see yourself as a species. Let's start somewhere that might surprise you. About 3 million years ago in what is now South Africa, a small child fell into a cave. The fossil of that child, known as the Taung child, was discovered in 1924 and became one of the most famous early hominin specimens ever found. Scientists spent decades debating how it ended up in that cave. Was it washed in by a flood? Did it fall in accidentally? Then researchers looked more carefully at the skull. The eye sockets showed puncture marks consistent with talons. The pattern matched exactly what modern eagles do when they carry prey back to their nests. That child wasn't washed into the cave. It was carried there by a bird. The crowned eagle, which still exists today in sub-Saharan Africa, is capable of killing animals up to 10 times its own weight. It hunts by dropping from the sky at speeds over 100 kilometers per hour, driving its talons through the skull of its target, and carrying the carcass to a safe location to feed. Fossil evidence suggests that early hominins, particularly young ones and smaller adults, were regular prey for large eagles throughout Africa for millions of years. Your ancient ancestors didn't just fear things on the ground. They had to watch the sky. But the sky was the least of their problems. Let's talk about the cats. Dinophalus was a genus of large predatory cats that lived across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America from roughly 5 million years ago to around 1 million years ago. It wasn't the biggest cat of its era, but it was built with a particular efficiency that made it dangerous specifically to primates. Its teeth were shorter than a saber-toothed cat's, but longer than a modern lion's. Researchers examining fossil assemblages in South Africa found caves containing bones from multiple hominin species alongside Dinophalus remains. Some paleoanthropologists have proposed that Dinophalus may have been a specialist predator of early humans, not an opportunistic threat that occasionally killed one, but a cat that actively sought out our ancestors as a preferred food source. Imagine what that selective pressure does to a species over hundreds of thousands of years. Every individual whose instincts were slightly better at detecting a cat in the shadows survived longer and had more offspring. Everyone who was slightly less alert didn't. The fear of large cats that's wired into human neurology today isn't irrational. It's the direct biological inheritance from ancestors who lived and died alongside Dinophalus. And then there was Smilodon. Smilodon was the apex predator of the Americas from roughly 2.5 million years ago until its extinction about 10,000 years ago. By the time the first humans crossed into the Americas, Smilodon populator, the largest species, was already there. It weighed up to 400 kilograms. Its canine teeth extended up to 28 centimeters. Fossil sites in South America contain remains of giant ground sloths, ancient horses, mastodons, and early humans in proximity to Smilodon fossils. Whether it hunted humans directly or whether humans primarily encountered it as a competing predator around shared kill sites is still debated. But the timeline is clear. For at least the first few thousand years of human habitation in the Americas, Smilodon was present. And it was the largest, most heavily armed cat that has ever existed. The bite mechanics of Smilodon were different from modern lions. Researchers now believe it used its saber teeth not to bite down through the neck but to slice through soft tissue with a downward stabbing motion, targeting the throat and major blood vessels directly. This was a precision killing machine. And for a period of human prehistory, it shared the same landscape as our ancestors. Now shift your attention to the water and the riverbanks. Crocodilians have been hunting mammals at the water's edge for over 80 million years. The modern Nile crocodile is essentially unchanged from the species that shared the African landscape with early hominins. It is almost certainly the most consistent predator of early humans across time and geography. Anywhere our ancestors lived near water in Africa, crocodilians were present. Fossil records confirm this. Bite marks from large crocodilians appear on hominin bones recovered from sites throughout East and South Africa. The ambush strategy that modern Nile crocodiles use today, lying motionless at the water's edge and lunging with explosive speed, is the same strategy they used 3 million years ago. But the crocodilians of ancient Africa were not all the same size as the ones alive today. Crocodilus thorbjarnarsoni, which lived in East Africa until roughly 2 million years ago, was estimated at 8 meters long and over 1,000 kilograms. This was a crocodile large enough to take adult hominins in the same way modern Nile crocodiles take wildebeest, and our ancestors had to drink water every single day. Every trip to a river or lake was a potential encounter with this animal. Think about the behavioral adaptations that created. The extreme vigilance near water sources, the preference for drinking in groups, the tendency to send individuals ahead to check the banks before others approach. These aren't learned cultural behaviors. They're fear-based instincts refined over millions of years of deadly encounters. Step back further in time now, before the genus Homo even existed. Around 7 million years ago, our earliest ancestors, small bipedal primates in the forests and savannas of Africa, faced a predator landscape that was almost incomprehensibly dangerous compared to anything alive today. The Miocene and Pliocene epochs were home to a megafauna that dwarfs most of what survived into the modern era. Hyenas in this period included Pachacracuta brevirostris, the giant short-faced hyena, which stood nearly a meter at the shoulder and had bone-crushing jaws significantly more powerful than any hyena alive today. Fossil sites in Ethiopia and Kenya show evidence of Pachacracuta feeding on the same species our ancestors were competing with. The bear dog family, Amphicyonidae, also overlapped with early hominins in some regions. These animals were not true bears or true dogs, but something in between. Heavily muscled pack hunters with jaws capable of cracking bone, filling an ecological niche that no single living predator occupies today. Early hominins navigating these environments weren't apex predators. They were mid-level prey animals in an ecosystem packed with things that wanted to eat them. What's striking is that this vulnerability didn't end quickly. We tend to think of human prehistory as a swift progression from helpless prey to dominant hunter, but the fossil record tells a more complicated story. Early Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. For a significant portion of that time, we were still being preyed upon regularly. Cave sites in Morocco, dating to around 100,000 years ago, show human bones with the same distinctive scavenging marks left by large carnivores, as are found on the bones of prey animals in those same caves. Humans weren't just occasionally threatened. We were on the menu. And then there's the bear. Cave bears, Ursus spelaeus, lived across Europe and Asia and went extinct roughly 24,000 years ago. They were enormous, with large males reaching 700 kilograms or more. While cave bears were primarily herbivorous, they competed with early modern humans for shelter, and the interactions between the two species were not always peaceful. Cro-Magnon sites across Europe show evidence of conflict with cave bears, and the animals figure prominently in Upper Paleolithic cave art, suggesting they occupied significant psychological space in the lives of early Europeans. The cave lion, Panthera spelaea, was equally present and was unambiguously carnivorous. Larger than modern African lions, the cave lion hunted the same prey as early Europeans, and occasionally hunted early Europeans themselves. The psychological weight of all of this is enormous when you really sit with it. Humans are often confused by our own response to certain stimuli. Why do horror movies about being stalked by something in the dark trigger such a visceral, full-body fear response? Why do people who live in cities with no dangerous predators still experience nightmares about being chased? Why do children, without being taught, often fear snakes and large animals before they fear cars and electrical outlets, which are statistically far more dangerous? The answer that evolutionary psychology offers is that these fears were shaped by millions of years of actual selection pressure. The children of ancestors who were terrified of large animals tended to survive. The children of ancestors who weren't tended not to. Your nervous system doesn't fully know that you no longer live in the Pleistocene. Some part of your brain is still listening for cats in the dark. The transition from prey to dominant predator didn't happen in a single moment. And it wasn't simply about developing better weapons. It was a gradual process involving a combination of tool use, fire, cooperative group strategies, and cognitive flexibility. Evidence from sites in southern Africa suggests that controlled use of fire may date back over 1 million years in some hominin populations. Fire changed the calculus significantly. Large predators that would approach a vulnerable sleeping hominin in the open were far less likely to approach one sleeping near flames. Fire was shelter in a way that no physical structure our early ancestors could build ever was. Wolves maintain pack structures to bring down prey larger than any individual member can handle. Early humans evolved a similar strategy for protection. Groups of hominins working together, making coordinated noise, throwing projectiles, and mobbing predators, could drive off animals that would have easily killed any one of them alone. The social structure of human groups, the intense loyalty, the complex communication, the fierce protection of group members, these traits weren't selected for because they were abstractly virtuous. They were selected for because groups that had them survived predator encounters and groups that didn't tend to get picked off one by one. The spear changed everything. Wooden throwing spears recovered from a site in Germany, the Schöningen spears, date to roughly 300,000 years ago and represent some of the earliest evidence of purpose-built long-range hunting weapons. A group of hominins armed with spears capable of reaching a predator from 5 to 8 meters away are a fundamentally different threat than a group throwing rocks from close range. Projectile weapons gave our ancestors the ability to kill or seriously wound large predators from outside the range, where those predators could retaliate effectively. Over tens of thousands of years, this capability shifted the balance dramatically. But the real tipping point may have been cognitive rather than technological. At some point, our ancestors didn't just react to predators. They began to understand predator behavior, predict movement patterns, use landscape features to create advantages, and actively pursue and eliminate threats rather than simply avoiding them. Cave lion hunting, evidence of which appears in Ice Age European sites, represents a qualitatively different relationship with apex predators than anything seen in other primate species. We went from prey to competitor to hunter of the very animals that had hunted us for millions of years. What you carry from all of this is stranger and more profound than it might initially seem. Every anxiety you've ever felt in the dark, every instinctive unease near a large animal, every hair that's risen on the back of your neck when you sensed something watching you, these aren't neurological glitches or irrational holdovers from a primitive past. They're the direct inheritance of ancestors who survived by being afraid in exactly the right moments. The predators are gone, or mostly gone, and we inhabit a world our Pliocene ancestors could not have imagined. But something in the architecture of the human brain still remembers what it felt like to be small and soft and slower than the things that wanted to catch us. We are the descendants of the ones who made it through, and the ones who made it through were terrified and careful, and never entirely sure what was waiting at the edge of the firelight.